I parked beneath the old oak tree, where rainwater still clung to the leaves from the storm the night before. In both hands, I carried a glass jar of homemade blackberry jam. It was a small thing, but my daughter loved it, or at least, she used to. I had not told Claire I was coming. I wanted to surprise her. Maybe she needed company. Maybe she needed her mother. The moment I stepped inside the farmhouse, I knew something was wrong. The kitchen was crowded. Coats were thrown across chairs. Shoes were piled beside the back door. A toddler screamed somewhere down the hallway, while something greasy sizzled on the stove. Claire stood near the sink. Her hair was pulled into a tight ponytail, and her eyes looked swollen from lack of sleep. She saw me and forced a smile. It disappeared almost immediately. Then a woman's voice cut through the kitchen. "Get your mother out of my kitchen." I froze. Behind the stove stood Patricia, my daughter's mother-in-law. I had met her several times, but never like this. She flipped food in a pan without even bothering to look at me. Claire's face turned red. "Mom, it's fine," I said. I placed the jar of jam on the counter. Nobody thanked me. A man brushed past carrying a beer. I assumed he was one of Patricia's sons. He didn't say hello. He didn't even look at me. I stepped into the hallway. The photographs on the walls told me more than anyone had. There was only one picture of Claire and her husband, Derek. The rest showed children and relatives I barely recognized. I suddenly felt like a stranger inside the home I had helped give my daughter. Claire followed me. "I'm sorry, Mom. How long have they been here?" She looked toward the kitchen. "A while." "How long is a while?" She said nothing. Then I noticed the guest bedroom door. It was closed. A thin line of light showed beneath it. 6 months earlier, I had stood on this same porch beside Claire and handed her the deed papers. At the time, her marriage was already falling apart. She and Derek had barely spoken. Their phone calls were short. Their dinners were silent. Even when Claire said everything was fine, I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. I had told her the farmhouse could be a fresh beginning. "This is yours," I said then. "No conditions. Make it whatever you want." I meant every word. The mortgage had originally been handled with my help, but the property belonged entirely to Claire. No shared ownership, no hidden agreement, just her. I wanted her to have one place in the world where nobody could tell her who she had to be. But now, 6 months later, I hardly recognized the woman living there. That night, I woke to footsteps moving down the hallway. Patricia's slippers. Claire was curled up on the couch beneath a thin blanket. The master bedroom door was closed. Agon. In the morning, Claire made coffee without looking at me. Patricia took the first cup. Derek never came out. "I can make breakfast," I offered. "I already made grits," Claire answered quickly. She sounded nervous, almost as if touching her own stove required permission. I sat at the kitchen table and watched them eat. Patricia talked about a baby shower. Claire nodded politely. When she reached for the sugar bowl, some spilled across the table. Nobody helped her clean it. Later, Claire led me to the shed. It had once been her art studio. Her canvases were gone. Her brushes were gone. Her easel had been shoved behind plastic containers and cases of cheap beer. Laundry covered the table where she used to paint. "I haven't painted lately," she whispered. I looked at the empty walls. There was one nail left behind. It seemed to be waiting for her to come back. That was when I understood. This wasn't a temporary family visit anymore. They had taken over her home, and Claire had slowly disappeared inside it. I didn't confront anyone that night, not yet. Instead, I went back to my room and stared at the copy of the deed inside my suitcase. The next morning, I drove into town. I had one question for the county office. Who legally owned 218 Larchill Road? I already knew the answer. I just needed the paperwork to prove it. The county office opened at 8. I arrived 10 minutes early and sat in my car, watching employees unlock the doors. I had spent the entire drive rehearsing what I would say, not because I was uncertain, because I was afraid of what I might discover. I had helped Claire buy the farmhouse because I wanted her to have something nobody could take away from her. But lately, it felt as though everyone had taken something anyway. Her confidence, her voice, her space, maybe even her belief that she deserved better. At 8 sharp, I walked inside. The clerk behind the counter looked up. "Can I help you?" I need the property records for 218 Larchill Road. She typed the address. Owner? Claire Monroe. The printer hummed. A few seconds later, she handed me the documents. I looked down. There it was. Claire Monroe, sole owner. No Patricia, no Derek, no other family member, just Claire. I requested a second certified copy. The clerk slid it across the counter. Anything else? No. I folded the original carefully and placed the certified copy inside my purse. My hands didn't shake until I reached the parking lot. I sat behind the steering wheel for several minutes. The answer had always been there. I had simply needed the courage to use it. When I returned to the farmhouse, I could hear shouting before I even opened the door. Patricia was furious about something. One of Derek's sisters was laughing in the hallway. Someone had left wet footprints across the kitchen floor. I walked through the noise without saying a word. Claire stood at the counter, washing dishes. Her shoulders were bent forward. I put the certified deed on the kitchen table. The room slowly quieted. Claire looked at me, then at the paper. "What is that? Your property record." Patricia turned around. "What?" I opened the document and placed my finger on the owner's name. "This house belongs to Claire." Patricia stared at the paper. So nobody gets to move in and take over without her permission." Her expression hardened. "She's my daughter-in-law." "I know, and this is a family matter." "No," I said calmly. "It's her house." Derek finally looked up from his phone. His face tightened. "What's going on?" I turned toward him. "You have until noon tomorrow to leave." The kitchen went completely silent. Patricia laughed, not because anything was funny, because she thought I was bluffing. "You can't throw us out." "I can't," I replied. "Claire can." Claire looked at me in shock. I softened my voice. "You don't have to say anything right now." She stared at the deed. For the first time since I arrived, something changed in her expression. Not anger, not fear, recognition. She remembered this was her house. That evening, nobody spoke much during dinner. Forks scraped against plates. The clock on the wall seemed louder than usual. Patricia avoided looking at me. Derek kept checking his phone. Claire barely touched her food. After dinner, I heard a bedroom door slam, then another. Voices traveled through the walls. "You let her humiliate us!" Patricia shouted. Claire answered quietly. "She didn't humiliate you. She divided this family." "No," Claire said. Her voice was still soft, but it wasn't trembling anymore. "She showed me the truth." I sat alone in the guest room, listening. Derek said something I couldn't make out, then silence. The kind of silence that comes when someone realizes an argument has nowhere left to go. The next morning, I woke before dawn. I heard suitcases rolling across the floor, threakers opening, closet doors slamming. Nobody said goodbye. At 10:30, one of Derek's sisters walked outside carrying 2 bags. She muttered something about disrespect. Another followed. Then Patricia appeared. She came down the stairs wearing sunglasses. Even though the morning was cloudy, she stopped in front of me. "You think you've won?" I looked at her. "No." Her mouth twisted. "You've destroyed your daughter's marriage." I shook my head. "No, I stopped helping you destroy it." Her face hardened. She turned toward Claire. "You should be ashamed of yourself." Claire stood in the doorway. She looked terrified. But she didn't step backward. "I've been ashamed for a long time," she said. Patricia froze. Claire swallowed. "I'm just not going to be anymore." For several seconds, nobody moved. Then Patricia grabbed her bag and walked toward the car. The door slammed. The engine started. And just like that, the people who had filled the farmhouse with noise began disappearing down the driveway. I watched until the last car vanished. Claire remained standing beside me. Neither of us spoke. For the first time in months, the house was quiet. Not empty. Quiet. There was a difference. Then I noticed Derek standing in the doorway. He hadn't left. He looked at Claire, then at me. His jaw tightened. "This isn't over," he said. Claire didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. And somehow, I knew the hardest part was only beginning. Derek didn't leave with his family. He remained near the back door, arms folded across his chest, watching Claire as if he were waiting for her to apologize. She didn't. Instead, she turned toward the kitchen and began gathering the dishes. Derek finally spoke. "You let your mother come in here and embarrass everyone." Claire placed a plate in the sink. Your family embarrassed themselves. His eyes narrowed. You've changed. Claire looked at him. No, I stopped pretending. I stayed quiet. This was her conversation, her moment. Derek stepped closer. You know what happens when families stop forgiving each other? Claire dried her hands. Maybe we should have started with respect, he scoffed. You're choosing your mother over your husband. Claire shook her head. I'm choosing myself. The words hung between them. Derek stared at her as though she had spoken a language he didn't understand, then he looked at me. This is what you wanted, isn't it? I met his eyes. No, he waited. I wanted my daughter to have a home. His expression hardened. She had one. No, I said quietly. She had a house. There is a difference. Derek walked away. He spent the rest of the afternoon moving from room to room without doing anything. He opened drawers, closed them, chalked his phone. Walked outside, came back inside. It was as though he was waiting for someone to tell him what to do. Claire didn't. That night he slept in the living room. Claire went upstairs. I stayed in the guest room. For the first time, I could hear the house settling without people shouting over it. The next morning I found Claire standing by the kitchen window. She was holding a cup of coffee. Did you sleep? I asked. A little. She looked tired, but she also looked different, lighter. I thought he'd leave with them, she said. So did I. He says he's staying because this is his home too. I nodded. Legally? She shook her head. No. Then you get to decide what happens next. She stared into her coffee. I don't know how to do this. You don't have to know everything today. She gave me a small smile. That afternoon, Derek finally packed a bag. Not because he had accepted anything, because he wanted Claire to chase him. He stood near the front door with his suitcase. I'm going to my brother's. Claire nodded. Okay. He looked disappointed. That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say? That you want me to stay? Claire took a slow breath. I don't know if I do. His face changed. For the first time, he seemed genuinely frightened. You don't mean that. I do. He walked out without another word. His truck remained in the driveway for several minutes. Then the engine started. Claire watched from the window. She didn't cry. She didn't run after him. She simply watched until the truck disappeared. Then she closed the curtain. The house was finally hers again. But reclaiming a house wasn't the same as reclaiming a life. We started with the master bedroom. The sheets smelled like unfamiliar perfume and strong detergent. Claire pulled everything from the bed, pillowcases, blankets, sheets, even the decorative pillows Patricia had brought. She stuffed them into laundry baskets. I can't believe this was my bedroom, she whispered. I didn't answer. Some things didn't need answers. We opened every window. Fresh air moved through the rooms. The curtains lifted gently. It felt as though the house itself were breathing again. In the closet, Claire found Patricia's robe hanging behind the door. She stared at it, then removed it from the hook. Donation? Donation. She folded it once and placed it in a box. In the hallway, we found old magazines and abandoned shopping bags. In the kitchen, Claire discovered 3 cupboards filled with things that weren't hers. She emptied them. By afternoon, the farmhouse looked unfamiliar. Not because we had changed it, because we had finally removed everything that never belonged there. Then Claire opened the shed. She stood in the doorway for a long time. Her art supplies were still there. Her easel was buried beneath storage boxes. Her sketchbooks were covered in dust. She pulled one free. A cloud of dust rose into the sunlight. She coughed and laughed. It was the first real laugh I'd heard from her in months. I forgot this existed. You didn't forget, I said. She looked at me. You were pushed away from it. She ran her fingers across the cover. Inside was a half-finished drawing of the garden. She stared at it. I used to love this. You still do. She smiled faintly. Maybe. That evening, we sat on the porch. The sky turned orange beyond the fields. Claire rested her head against the chair. Mom? Yes? Thank you for coming. I reached across and squeezed her hand. I should have come sooner. She shook her head. I wasn't ready. Maybe. She looked toward the garden. But I am now. Inside the house, her phone buzzed. She didn't move. It buzzed again. Finally, Claire stood and checked the screen. A message from Derek. I miss you. I hope you're happy with what you've done. Claire read it twice. Then she deleted it. No response. She returned to the porch. "What did he say?" I asked. "Nothing worth keeping." She sat beside me. For a while, we watched the evenings settle over the farmhouse. Tomorrow there would be more cleaning, more decisions, maybe even harder conversations. But tonight, Claire had something she hadn't possessed in months. Space, and sometimes, space is where a person finally remembers who they are. The next morning, Claire woke before sunrise. I found her in the kitchen wearing an old sweatshirt, staring at the empty counter. For months, that kitchen had been crowded with people who treated her like an inconvenience. Now there was only the quiet hum of the refrigerator. She poured 2 cups of coffee. "Mom," she said, sliding one toward me, "I think I want to change this place." I smiled. "What do you have in mind?" "I don't know yet." She looked around. "But I want it to feel like me again." That was enough. We started with the kitchen. Claire removed the decorative items Patricia had brought and placed them in a box. She wasn't angry. She simply didn't want reminders of people who had made her feel like a guest in her own home. Then she opened the pantry. Half the shelves were filled with food she didn't recognize. "This isn't even mine," she said. We laughed. It felt strange laughing while cleaning, but it felt good. By noon, the farmhouse looked completely different. The counters were clear, the windows were open, sunlight stretched across the wooden floor. Claire found an old recipe book tucked behind a stack of plates. She opened it and smiled. My grandmother's handwriting. I leaned closer. The pages were filled with recipes written in faded blue ink. "You used to make her biscuits every Sunday." "I know." Claire's smile faded. "I haven't made them in years. Then maybe it's time." That afternoon we baked. The biscuits came out slightly uneven. One was nearly burned. Claire laughed so hard she had to sit down. "I've forgotten how to do normal things." "You haven't forgotten," I said. "You've just been surviving." She looked at me. The laughter disappeared. "That sounds worse when you say it." Sometimes the truth does. After lunch, Claire went back to the shed. I followed her. She pulled out her easel and wiped away the dust. Then she found her old ceramic brush holder, the same one she had used in college. She held it carefully. "I thought this was gone." "It wasn't." She looked at me. "How did you know?" I hesitated. Then I told her about the mug. The cracked blue flowered mug I had found in the trash. Claire's eyes widened. "You saved it?" I nodded. "It was yours." She took it from my hands. For several seconds, she simply stared at it. Then she pressed it against her chest. "I remember when you gave me this. College orientation. You told me I'd need something that felt like home." I smiled. "You cried because you thought you'd never make friends." Claire laughed softly. "I did make friends." "You did. And then I married someone who convinced me I didn't need any." I said nothing. She set the mug down. "I don't want to become that person again." "You won't." "How do you know?" "Because you're already fighting your way back." That evening, Claire painted, not for anyone, not for a class, not for money, just because she wanted to. I sat nearby while she worked. The brush moved slowly at first. Then faster colors appeared across the canvas, a garden path, the farmhouse, the oak tree, and a small figure standing on the porch. When she finally stepped back, she stared at the painting. "I like it." "You should." She smiled. "I haven't said that about something I've made in years." The following week, Derek came back. He didn't call first. His truck appeared at the end of the driveway just after lunch. Claire saw him through the window. Her expression tightened. "Do you want me to stay?" She shook her head. "No." "Are you sure?" "Yes." I stayed inside while she walked onto the porch. Derek stood beside his truck. "You look different." Claire crossed her arms. "I feel different." He looked toward the house. "Can we talk?" "We're talking." "I mean privately." She shook her head. "No," he sighed. "Your mother has turned you against me." Claire's expression remained calm. "No one had to turn me against you." He looked away. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe. I can change." Claire nodded. "I hope you do." His eyes lifted. "Then come home." Claire looked behind him toward the road. "This is my home." Derek didn't answer. "You were supposed to be my husband," she continued, "not the person who watched your family take over my life. I didn't know you felt that way." "That was the problem." He swallowed. "Is there someone else?" Claire almost laughed. "No." "Then why won't you give us another chance?" Because I finally gave myself one. Derek stood there silently, then he nodded. Not because he agreed, because he understood there was nothing left to argue. He got back into his truck. Claire watched him leave. When she returned inside, she didn't cry. She walked straight to the kitchen, picked up the old blue mug, and made herself tea. That night, she painted until midnight. The farmhouse stayed quiet. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like freedom. 3 months passed quietly, not perfectly. Quietly, there was a difference. Claire began teaching art classes on Saturday mornings. At first, only 2 women from town came, then 4, then 6 soon. The old barn was filled with folding chairs, sketchbooks, paintbrushes, and the sound of people laughing. I watched my daughter become herself again. She laughed loudly now. She didn't cover her mouth. She didn't look around first to see whether someone approved. She simply laughed. The change was so gradual that I sometimes didn't notice it until I remembered the woman who had been sitting on that couch 3 months earlier. That woman had barely spoken. This woman argued with me about breakfast recipes. She complained when I watered her plants incorrectly. She played music too loudly while painting. She left paintbrushes everywhere. And I loved every bit of it. One Saturday afternoon, after her students left, Claire stood in the barn doorway watching them drive away. "They liked the class," I said. "They did. You should charge more." She laughed. "You always say that. Because you're always undercharging." She picked up a paintbrush. "Maybe next month." I smiled. There were still traces of the past. A few times Derek called. Claire never answered. Sometimes he sent messages. She didn't respond. Eventually, the messages became less frequent. Then they stopped. Patricia never apologized. Claire didn't expect her to. One morning, while we were having breakfast, Claire received an envelope. There was no return address. She turned it over twice. "Do you think it's from them?" "Probably." She opened it carefully. Inside was a short letter. She read it silently. Then she placed it on the table. "What does it say?" Claire looked toward the window. That family should forgive each other. I waited. "She says I embarrassed everyone." She folded the letter. "She says my mother manipulated me." I sighed. "And what do you think?" Claire picked up her coffee. "I think people who hurt you often want forgiveness before they understand what they did." She stood and walked to the trash. The letter disappeared beneath yesterday's newspaper. No argument, no tears. No dramatic speech, just a choice. Her choice. Later that afternoon, we worked in the garden. Claire had bought several bags of bulbs. She knelt in the soil, carefully digging small holes. "You know," I said, "most people plant these in fall." "I know. So why are you planting them now?" She smiled. "Because they can survive." I watched her place another bulb into the earth. "That's your argument. That's my hope." She covered the bulb with soil. "When the weather gets better, they'll bloom." I nodded. "Maybe I will too." She glanced at me. "You already are." She smiled. We worked until sunset. The garden looked different now, not finished, but alive. That night, Claire returned to the kitchen and opened the cabinet above the sink. She pulled out the cracked blue mug. She turned it over in her hands. The hairline crack was still there, so was the chipped edge. Nothing about it was perfect. She filled it with tea. Then she sat across from me. "Do you remember what you told me when you gave me this?" "I told you it was ugly." Claire laughed. "No, you didn't. I was thinking it. You said it would remind me that something didn't have to be perfect to be worth keeping." I smiled. "Sounds like something I'd say." She looked at the mug. "I used to think that meant other people." "What do you mean?" "I thought I had to keep fixing people, keep forgiving people, keep making excuses." Her fingers tightened around the handle. "I thought if I loved someone enough, they'd eventually treat me well." I didn't interrupt. "But now I think it means something else." "What?" Claire looked directly at me. "Sometimes you're the thing worth keeping." My throat tightened. I reached across the table and took her hand. She squeezed mine. The farmhouse was quiet around us, but it wasn't the empty quiet from before. This was different. There were paintings leaning against walls, fresh herbs growing outside. Art supplies scattered across the barn. A stack of sketchbooks sat beside the stairs. The place carried evidence of life. Claire had reclaimed more than a property. She had reclaimed her voice, her work, her confidence, her future. The next morning, she painted the final section of the garden portrait she had started months earlier. When she finished, she carried the canvas outside. I stood beside her. The painting showed the farmhouse beneath the oak tree. The garden stretched toward the porch, and beside the house stood a woman holding a small blue mug. Claire looked at it for a long moment. "Do you like it?" "I love it," she smiled. "Good." Then she turned toward the farmhouse. "I think I'm finally home." And this time, she didn't mean the building. She meant herself. A year after the day I found Claire's name on the deed, I drove toward the farmhouse on a bright Saturday morning. The oak tree still stood beside the driveway, its branches stretched over the roof, just as they had when Claire first moved in. But everything else had changed. Flowers lined the walkway. Painted stones marked the garden beds. The barn doors were open, and from inside came the sound of laughter. I parked beneath the tree and stepped out. Claire was standing near the barn with a group of students. She wore an old denim apron covered in paint. Her hair was tied loosely behind her head. There was a streak of blue across her cheek. She looked happy, not pretending to be happy, actually happy. When she saw me, she smiled. "Mom!" She hurried over and hugged me. "You're early. You told me breakfast was at 9. It is." I looked at the clock. "It is 9, she laughed. "Then you're exactly on time." We walked toward the farmhouse. The kitchen smelled like coffee and cinnamon. A loaf of bread cooled near the window. The old blue mug sat on the open shelf. The crack was still visible. Claire had never replaced it. I had asked her once why. She told me that replacing it would make the story disappear. And she wasn't ready to forget. Not the pain, not the lesson, not the woman she had been before she learned to stand up for herself. We sat at the kitchen table. Claire poured coffee. "You know," she said, "I used to think you ruined my marriage." I looked at her. She smiled. "I don't mean that badly." "I know. I was angry when you came with that deed." "I know. I thought you were forcing me to make a decision I wasn't ready to make." I nodded. "You weren't ready." "No." She looked around the kitchen. "But I needed someone to remind me I was allowed to make one." I reached for her hand. "You made it yourself." She squeezed my fingers. Outside, one of her students called her name. Claire stood. "I'll be right back." I watched her walk toward the barn. Her shoulders were straight. Her steps were confident. There was no hesitation, no looking over her shoulder, no asking whether someone approved. She belonged here. Later that afternoon, the students gathered around the long table beneath the barn windows. Claire taught them how to paint light across a landscape. I sat quietly in the corner. One young woman struggled with her canvas. "I can't make it look right," she complained. Claire smiled. "Don't try to make it perfect." The woman looked up. "Then what should I do?" "Make it yours." I smiled to myself. Those words sounded familiar. After class, everyone left. Claire locked the barn and walked back toward the house. The sun was beginning to disappear behind the fields. We stood together on the porch. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Claire said, "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't come that day? All the time. What do you think?" I looked at her. "I think you would have found your way eventually." She smiled. But maybe it would have taken longer." She nodded. "I think so, too." The wind moved through the oak branches. Claire rested her arms against the porch railing. "Derek called last month." I looked at her. "What did he want?" "He said he's doing better." "Did you answer?" "Yes." I waited. "What did you say?" "I told him I was glad. And that I was doing better, too." She smiled. "That's all." That was all. I understood. Sometimes closure wasn't an apology. Sometimes it wasn't reconciliation. Sometimes it was simply reaching the point where someone's name no longer had the power to disturb your peace. Claire looked toward the garden. The tulips had finally bloomed. Raws of color stretched along the path. She had planted them months earlier, unsure whether they would survive. They had. "I thought I lost everything," she said. "You lost a marriage." She nodded. "But I found myself." I smiled. "That was worth more." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "I wish I had understood sooner." Most people don't. We stayed there until the sky turned dark. Inside, the kitchen light glowed warmly through the windows. The farmhouse no longer felt like a place recovering from something. It felt alive. There were paintings on the walls, books on the tables, flowers in jars, brushes in cups, fresh bread in the kitchen. Life everywhere. Claire had once told me she was afraid the farmhouse would become another place where she disappeared. Instead, it became the place where she returned to herself. Before going to bed, I walked into the kitchen one last time. The blue mug sat on the shelf, cracked, chipped, imperfect, still useful, still loved. Claire came up behind me. "You're staring at that mug again." "I like it. You've always liked it." I smiled. "It reminds me of something." "What?" "That broken things don't always need replacing." Claire looked at the mug, then at me. "Sometimes they just need a safe place." I nodded. She turned off the kitchen light. We walked toward the hallway together. Behind us, the farmhouse settled into silence. But this time, the silence wasn't frightening. It wasn't filled with arguments, footsteps, slammed doors, or whispered insults. It was peaceful. It belonged to Claire. It belonged to the life she had rebuilt. And as I closed my bedroom door that night, I realized something. I hadn't saved my daughter. She had saved herself. I had only reminded her that she was worth saving. And sometimes, a mother doesn't need to fight every battle for her child. Sometimes, she only needs to stand beside her long enough for her to remember how to fight for herself. That farmhouse had once been filled with people who made Claire feel like she didn't belong. Now every corner carried her voice, her art, her laughter, her choices, her life. And that was the greatest gift of all. Not the house, not the deed, not even the fresh start. It was watching my daughter finally walk through her own front door without asking anyone for permission to belong there. For the first time in years, Claire was home. And this time, nobody could take that away from her.